What's up, guys? It's TheJongasm bringing to you a cartoon conspiracy theory about Ed, and Eddy. This is the one that a lot of people messaged me about, or I talked to in person, and they said they wanted to see it. So I figured I'd do it, because it's pretty creepy. The main gist of the theory is that all of the kids in the neighborhood are dead, and the neighborhood itself is purgatory. Now let me explain the theory a little bit. All of the kids in that specific neighborhood in purgatory lived in the same neighborhood in real life. However, they lived in this neighborhood decades apart, the 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on. I should also say that the purgatory neighborhood is not based off of the neighborhood that they lived in real life. A couple quick things to mention before I get into every character's backstory. One thing that's really weird is that throughout the entire series we do not see a single adult. We see a vague shadow of one, which never moves, which is kind of weird. And we hear the adults mentioned, but we never actually get to see one. Also, if you look at each of the kids in the neighborhood, they all have very weird pigments to their skin. Example, Ed has yellow skin and a blue tongue. That's weird. Do you know why it's weird? Is because do you know what else has yellow skin and a blue tongue? A corpse. A corpse does. Kind of looks like a corpse is what I'm trying to say. Now, Rolf, the foreign kid that you might remember who had the farm, he died around 1903, or at least in the early 1900s. Rolf and his family had a farm, okay? And on the farm, he had to do chores, because that's what farm kids do. One day when he was tending to the animals, one of the bulls broke out of its cage, and it trampled him to death after he tried to stop it. I don't know why he would try to stop it, but he did. So, in purgatory, Rolf continues farming, and he brought most of the animals with him in spirit, but if you notice, he does not bring any of the cattle, because that's the reason he even got sent there, is because it killed him. Now, you may remember the kid named Johnny. Johnny is the one who had the plank, which I know if you saw Ed, and Eddy, you remember. Because let's face it, Plank was kind of a legend. Now, a couple decades later, specifically in the 1920s, Johnny's family moved onto Rolf's family's land, where Rolf lived. The land was still farmland, however, the family did not tend to it because they weren't farmers, so unlike Rolf, Johnny didn't have chores to keep him busy. Johnny was a weird kid. He didn't have friends, so he used his imagination and created his one and only friend, Plank. Eventually, Johnny was diagnosed with tuberculosis and died. When he died, the only friend he had by his side was Plank. And even though there are other kids in the purgatory neighborhood, he continued to play with just Plank by himself because that's what he did when he was alive. Now, Eddy, one of the characters that the show was named after, so I would assume you remembered him, moved on to Johnny's, once Rolf's, land in 1932 with many other families. There was enough farmland that all of the families could invest, split it up, and have their own houses. Eddy was kind of a troublemaker, and he was very imaginative, and he would do whatever he wanted to keep himself entertained, even if it meant he would lose a friend or two. One day, after stealing money from a couple of the neighborhood kids, they chased him, planning to beat him up. While they were chasing him, he dived into a local river where he ended up drowning. Now, Ed and his sister Sarah, in the 40s while the war was going on, moved into the neighborhood that was once Eddy's and Rolf's and Johnny's. In World War II, their father died as a soldier, which left their mother alone to raise them. Being that she was alone, she was constantly working to try to make money so she could feed the kids. Because their father died, Sarah did not have a father to look up to, so she mimicked basically everything her mom did. Now, since her mom was always running around, giving out orders and trying to make money, this is what Sarah thought was appropriate, which is why throughout the series she's always trying to let everyone know that she's the one in control. Unlike his sister Sarah, Ed took the opposite approach and basically shut the world out, which gave the impression that he was kind of an idiot because he never paid attention to anything around him. Instead, he got obsessed with comic books and monster movies, which became extremely popular after World War II. Then, when the brother and sister were being driven by their mom to visit their grandparents, they got in a car accident and the two died. Then there's the character Naz, or Naz. I don't actually know how to pronounce her name, so I'm going to call her Naz. Naz was born to hippie parents. She was blonde and she was beautiful, and she always had a way with the boys in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, in the summer of '79, a serial killer broke loose out of an insane asylum, went inside their house, raped Naz, killed her along with the rest of her family. She handled this was similar to the way Ed handled his life, where she just shut everything out and she forgot all about it. This is why in purgatory she never has to take any orders from her parents and always has free time to party and hang out because she doesn't have anyone to boss her around. Now Ed, Double D, was kind of a nerd when he was growing up, obviously. His parents were highly professional business workers and they were never really around when he was a kid, but they still managed to always control him. Instead of going out and exercising and being physical, he stayed in his room, studied, and he often did experiments. Unfortunately, the experiments is what Eventually, the experiments is what... Unfortunately, the experiments was... Eventually, doing all the experiments is what caused his death. There was a gas leak in his house one day when he was doing an experiment with a Bunsen burner. And if you know what a Bunsen burner is, it has a little to do with fire. When the fire from the Bunsen burner met up with the gas leak, the house exploded, killing him. Being that when he was alive, he let his parents dominate his entire life despite never being around, he continued this in purgatory. His parents were never in purgatory, but he only did things that he knew would not upset them. Now Kevin, the bully in the neighborhood, was born the day after Double D died. Kevin's father was an alcoholic and often beat him regularly, which caused Kevin to have anger issues and to take his anger issues out on other kids in his neighborhood when he was alive. Being that he was in denial about his father being so abusive when he died, in purgatory, his father is a distant figure, unlike in real life, and he's constantly showered in gifts instead of being beaten. Unfortunately, he continued his bullying ways into purgatory. Two more things. Are you still with me? I'm going to try to say them quick. Now, Jimmy, the little boy with the headgear, died around the year 2000. Jimmy had leukemia, and his parents were afraid to let him play with the other children in the neighborhood because they didn't want him to get hurt. Jimmy was depressed and was on his deathbed for an extremely long time before eventually dying in his room in 2000. Now, the Canker sisters, everyone's least favorite characters. Unlike the rest of the kids in the neighborhood, the Canker sisters are demons. Now, before you think that's really stupid, just listen to it. The whole purpose to the Canker sisters' existence is to drive everyone around the neighborhood crazy. The reason that they're so attracted to Ed, and Eddy is because they're the weakest kids in the neighborhood, meaning that they're the easiest to torture. The Canker sisters also possess unnatural abilities, unlike the other kids in purgatory, and are able to be anywhere at any time. Seems kind of demonic, doesn't it? Also, unlike the rest of the kids, they have normal colored skin and pink tongues. The reason they had pink tongues is because they weren't humans, which meant they didn't have to die to go to purgatory. Since they were never corpses, as a result, their tongues stayed pink, unlike the other kids in the neighborhood where their tongues were all blue and green and other colors. Now, one more thing, I promise. There is an episode in the series where Ed, and Eddy meet Eddy's brother. Now, when the characters do meet him, you see his personality as being kind of a douchebag. In order to visit Eddy's brother, they had to leave purgatory, which means they possibly left the neighborhood to go to hell, which is where his brother was, being that he is such a douchebag. Now, that's just the theory. This is not my idea. I'm not smart enough to come up with that. But yeah, that's basically the theory. There's nothing more that I could really add to it. I hope it didn't completely ruin your childhood, unless the Rugrats theory already did that. Make sure you rate so I know if you liked the video, comment so I know which conspiracy theories to do in the future, and subscribe if you want to see more of them. I love you all. I'll see you sometime soon, and stay fresh.